If this is, in fact, the writings, and again, I think, do you think there's a little bit of a doubt out there if this is actually real?
I did read up on that last night, and some of the former United States Supreme Court clerks who have actually been there, who've written the opinions, who've been in the process, many of them confirmed that this is what a draft opinion looks like. This is what is normally circulated, and if this is some type of fake opinion, it would be incredibly well done.
Yeah, I think we have two different opinions, and I want to play the first one. This is, and I think you'll appreciate hearing this. Greg Jarrett, who's been around for a long time on Fox News, here's I think he's more of the doubters list. Here's what he said.
It is a rough draft, so it is not as, let's say, elegant in its prose as the final draft would be. And I'm skeptical, for example, let me just read one portion of this alleged draft opinion. Roe was egregiously wrong from the start. Its reasoning was exceptionally weak. The decision has had damaging circumstance or consequences. Far from bringing about a national settlement of abortion issue, Roe and Casey have inflamed debate and deepened division. I must tell you that sounds very much like a politician wrote it. Not that I disagree with it. In fact, I have long argued those very sentences. I think it was wrong then. It's been wrong over the last 50 years, and I think it's still wrong. And I do suspect that the Supreme Court may, in the end, have enough votes to overturn Roe versus Wade. But right now, I'm in the skeptical category. Votes can change as the drafts go around. People have further conferences privately. Sometimes minds are changed. There have been some very famous cases in which powerful Supreme Court justices have bent the arms of their colleagues on the high court and managed to shift completely decisions that went one way and eventually turned the other way. So I'd be very cautious and skeptical. That portion I read doesn't seem to be written by an eloquent Supreme Court justice. Maybe it's a clerk.
Yeah, maybe it is a clerk. Response from Mike Hurst, former U.S. attorney. What do you think?
Obviously, I've never clerked for the United States Supreme Court, but I would strongly disagree with that statement that this was. It reads as if it was written by a politician. I mean, those two words, egregiously wrong. Those are the exact two words that our Solicitor General, Scott Stewart, Solicitor General for Mississippi, used in his arguments last year. And those two words are the same two words that Justice Kavanaugh used in I think it was a dissent last year. So to say those words indicated it was written by a politician, I just don't agree with that. I think the way, if you go back and read Roe versus Wade or Planned Parenthood versus Casey, I believe those opinions they read like they were written by a politician. And what I mean by that is just by making up in the, penumbras or liberty interest of the Constitution without any direct reference to the words or the language or the histories or traditions of our country, those cases were decided as if a legislature wrote them. This case is getting us and our courts back to its constitutional mandate, its constitutional duties, which is to simply interpret our Constitution. This is not a super legislature. This is getting away from the super legislative role the court played in Roe versus Wade and in Casey, and it gets the Supreme Court back to being a legitimate court in the sense of just simply interpreting the Constitution and the laws as written.
And Mike, if you think any of the justices wanted validation, all of these people, Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett, and the rest all are parents or grandparents or, and in this era, we've seen new technology and some of the pictures and things going on and how far and vicious the left can be with the Maryland and California bill that we just talked about yesterday, saying that a mother may have the right to end the life of a baby 28 days after they're born. Mostly if they've got a disability, just don't give aid and let the baby die. This is 28 days after the baby is born.
Right. And as the Mississippi Solicitor General argued and the Supreme Court referenced in this draft opinion, this case gets us away from being in the same category as countries like China and North Korea that have similar laws. If we don't value life as a culture and a society, everything else is off the table.
Here is Alan Dershowitz.
This reads like an Alito decision. I've been following the Supreme Court now for, 57 years, and I know the workings of the court. I know most of the justices. I know a lot of the law clerks. This has the sign of authenticity. It also, to me, and this is just a theory, but I think it may be correct, the leak was a very deliberate leak, perhaps by a law clerk who was very strongly opposed to reversing Roe versus Wade, seeking to make it public now so that pressure could be put on the Supreme Court, either by an act of Congress to pack the court or an act of Congress making a federal legislative right of every woman to have an abortion based on the Commerce Clause. But this was not just an inadvertent leak. I think this was an act of civil disobedience engaged in by a determined law clerk who thought it was so serious that a woman's right to abortion would be taken away, that they were willing to risk their bar, their career, their heritage on this, because this is going to be investigated. The FBI is going to be called in. And so this is a monumental day. Chief Justice Roberts is just so upset, I can imagine, because he's lost control. People will think, at least, he's lost control of the court. In all the years I've been following the Supreme Court, there's never been a leak like this.
So, Mike, what do they do now, though? I mean, what should the Supreme Court do? Do they have to answer this or remain mute on it?
Well,
what do they do?
You know, some opinions I saw last night were, and I think these are legitimate opinions, now that the draft opinion is out there, and if this is legitimate, I think they should probably expedite the release of the formal opinion. I think they should go ahead and not let this marinate, not let this fester. I think they should go ahead and get that opinion out sooner rather than later. As to the issue of the investigation, absolutely. I think the Supreme Court Chief Justice Roberts, you know, he's an institutionalist. He likes to protect the court, and for legitimate reasons. I think he should get to the bottom of it. There is an opinion or some investigation going around last night. I noticed that one of the current Supreme Court law clerks, when he was at Yale just a few years ago, was very adamant and part of the Yale Law School opposing Justice Kavanaugh, pushing Justice Kavanaugh, giving statements to a reporter on Justice Kavanaugh. Paul, it actually happens to be the exact same reporter that wrote the story. And now this law clerk is working at the United States Supreme Court for one of the liberal justices.
Yeah.
Coincidence? Maybe so, but who knows?
You think he'll show up at work today?
But Chief Justice Roberts should do everything in his power to get to the bottom of this. That means, you know, calling law clerks to the carpet, looking at their cell phone records, looking at their emails. I mean, this is anything that any other employer would do, and that's what should happen here.
One of the other paragraphs in the article that was released, the disclosure of Alito's draft majority opinion, a rare breach of Supreme Court secrecy and tradition around its deliberation, comes as all sides of the abortion debate are girding for the ruling. Speculations about the looming decision has been intense since the December oral arguments indicated a majority was inclined to support the Mississippi law. When was this supposed to be released?
You know, the Supreme Court doesn't have a deadline when it's released, but the legal experts were expecting it would probably be released in June or July, so another month or two.
At the end of the session.
Which is why I say if we're that close, go ahead and make it formal. Go ahead and release the opinion and let's move on. But again, this all this does, Paul, all this does is puts this divisive, tough issue back to we, the people. It puts us back to our elected representatives to make those decisions on a case-by-case, state-by-state basis, and that's where it should have been. That's where it had been for 185 years, from the Constitution to Roe v. Wade. That's where it was, and it's only been enshrined illegitimately in the Constitution for the last less than 50 years.
This was woke before woke was woke as we know it now, because for basically white Democrats, number one, to create a solid loyalty in African Americans, to decimate their population and have them stand up on the street corner in the black caucuses and in state houses and also in Washington, D.C., and support this.
Well, and,
it's amazing.
And Alito references the damage it's done to our African American community.
And To the power of disinformation. Go back to disinformation. The power of disinformation is amazing.
I would just call upon our listeners to pray. I mean, that's how we get out of this.
I want to touch base on this one more thing, and then get to what we originally were going to talk about: crime in Jackson and in the state when we return. You know, every time I hear one of those man on the street things, I think parents, when they hear this, they just need, I don't care if your kid's in the 10th, 11th, 12th grade, college, just ask them the question. If you can remember it when you see them. Who did we find in the Revolutionary War?
I'm speechless, Paul. Sorry.
and all of these, Jay Leno did a lot. There are quite a few people. Jesse Waters did a lot. But all of these are mostly college-age kids who seem to be of good means, to the point where they're either on a boardwalk somewhere at Atlantic City or California or something like that, and at the Surfside. But anyway, look, I got a little question here, and this just popped up. Now we know that this Supreme Court decision was kind of behind the news. Nobody was talking about it, right? And all of a sudden, late yesterday, this happened, right?
Right.
And just coincidentally, I'm reading a tweet here that says, "Join us for lunch tomorrow," which was yesterday, "to hear the amazing experience of our very own Mississippi Solicitor General Scott Stewart discuss his recent argument."
Actually, Paul, that luncheon is today.
That's what I'm saying. But you sent this out yesterday, right before the leak.
So I sent that out about 2:30 yesterday. The leak happened at 7:30.
Yes.
And now we're going to have the Mississippi Solicitor General Scott Stewart, who argued this case in front of the Supreme Court in December, speak today at River Hills Country Club in Jackson, Mississippi. Come out and support us.
That's a little bit. You got to wonder about that now.
Well, look, I think I really genuinely believe prayer got us here. There have been prayer rallies all around the countries. I went to a prayer rally at New Horizon Church here in Jackson, an African American church. Groups like the Center for Pregnancy Choices they're doing incredible work. I think prayer has gotten us to this point. We're on the precipice for seeing real positive change in our country. We just got to keep praying and get it over the finish line.
We may go down in history, the state of Mississippi, and also Dobbs, and that would be a historic. It would be emblazoned in the minds as much, of course, in this one with infamy on the left.
And kudos to Andy Gibson.
Versus Wade.
Kudos to Andy Gibson, Commissioner of Agriculture, who did this when he was in the legislature, to the Speaker, to the Lieutenant Governor, the Governor. They all demand a lot of thanks and congratulations on this.
Well, I've often said this, that it would be really weird when you had a David Dukes who would, if he had enough money to go out there and publicize this and be on the side of Planned Parenthood. What would they say if you had racists or members of the Klan who was standing behind the abortion law, because they understand the vast majority of these folks are African American babies,
right,
per population.
And if you look at the numbers, this is incredible to me. 61 children, 61 babies are aborted or murdered in the state of Mississippi each week. 61. I mean, we can talk all theory, we can talk the Constitution, I can talk, all this stuff, liberty, 14th Amendment, all this stuff all day long. But at the end of the day, these are human lives that are being lost. 61 babies a week in the state of Mississippi.
In a period of time when the contraceptions to all of the birth control devices that are available are more so now than have been ever before in history. So there are preventatives out there, and just more responsibility is needed.
It is.
So anything else that you want to talk about before we leave this?
No, I want to put it in perspective. All this decision means is it goes back to us. It goes back to we the people. This hopefully in our state will mean that there will be fewer babies murdered, frankly, in our state. And I hate to put it in those frank terms, Paul, but that's exactly what this is. Which
means Planned Parenthood could not open a business here, or abortion clinics would not be able to be located in any state that does not pass that legislation.
That's right. And I believe, I know your listeners will correct me, but I believe the Mississippi legislature has already passed law that says if and when Roe v. Wade and Casey are overturned, then abortion will be outlawed in the state of Mississippi. And that's
the other side of that is if somebody wants an abortion and they're just they are dead set on and aborting that baby, they would have to travel somewhere to a state that has that ability to do that.
That's right.
If Joe Biden and that group wants to put migrants on buses and trip and send them someplace, then that ought to be their advocacy to come and take somebody to California or wherever the nearest state is that they can get an abortion, period.
Well, and I would encourage listeners who are contemplating that decision to reach out to a group like the Center for Pregnancy Choices, because if you go on their website, you will see these amazing stories of women who were contemplating abortion, who were introduced or ran into, or the CPC found them, and their lives have been changed for the better by having those kids. And if you think about all the would want to be parents in the world, all the want to be parents in our country who would take these children and who would adopt them. I mean, it's sad that our immediate, or some people's immediate first reaction to a pregnancy is, well, we're just going to abort it.
Justice Barrett touched on that apparently in here, saying basically with all of the resources out there for adoption.
Absolutely, and she touched on it in her oral arguments, talking about the safe haven laws we have nowadays, all the things that are available to women in our society today means that we should never, ever again have a baby murdered.
You've got to wonder if this was a law clerk that did this. Did they have some communication with anybody in the Biden administration, and who knew what, when did they know it, and et cetera? It's going to be interesting to see.
Even did they have some communication with their boss? I mean, I'm still taken aback by the anger and the vitriol that Justice Sotomayor showed in the oral arguments to our Solicitor General Scott Stewart.
It was quite unprofessional.
It was nothing like I've ever seen from a Supreme Court justice, and it just makes you wonder: was this just a rogue law clerk releasing this, or was this a more coordinated attack on our Constitution?
We will keep you abreast of that. Of course, Fox News on the top of the hour will give you any updates at all. And I think, alluding to what Mike said, now let's watch and see what the Supreme Court do. Will they have a reply on this one? Will anybody step forward and say, well, their possibility is to go on and get this thing out there and be done with it?
Hopefully they'll release the opinion quickly. Yeah. They'll do an investigation, find the culprit, and that person will be disbarred and any other legal actions taken against him.
Mayhem at the Mudbug the other day in the capital city. People from across the entire state were there, and they were having a good time. And then we had these. Did you see the age of these kids?
I did. I not only did
Mike,
I see the age.
You worked feverishly trying to do something in the Jackson area as U.S. Attorney for the Southern District.
I did, and I still do behind the scenes, Paul. I mean, we're still supporting our law enforcement. My wife has a ministry with others in Jackson. I mean, we're still in the community trying to do what we can. But, I mean, unfortunately, I could see this day coming. And frankly, if leadership in Jackson doesn't change or doesn't do something different, it's only going to get worse. I mean, it's incredible. It's incredulous, actually, that the mayor would go on TV yesterday and say, our capital city is safe, after you have 15 and 16-year-olds shooting others, mass shootings in a crowded area, and the city of Jackson be the murder capital of our nation last year, and he comes on the news and says our capital city is safe. That's just BS, Paul, and he's not doing a thing to change it.
Deputies arrested Calvin Berry, 15 years old, and Ledrick Trim, 16 years old. Booked him at the Henley Young Juvenile Justice Center. I'm not sure how many resources that place has or anything else, but
something's got to change.
To me, that's the freshman class coming up here. Well, the senior class of the ones who've graduated are still out there killing people, or have been killed, or we're taking care of them in prison.
Well, not only do we need a change in the mayor's office, because he's not doing anything. He can give a good speech. He can say big fancy words, but there's no substance behind what he does, and he's got no incentive to change anything. But I would also direct the listeners to our courts here in the city of Jackson. I mean, that 15-year-old, the shooter.
I want to talk about that when we come back. We got one quick section, but I was communicating with Andy Gibson yesterday, and we both were talking about the possibility of creating a capital judicial district. And will this maybe find some favorable ears more so now than it did several weeks ago when the session was on? We'll talk about that. Final segment with Mike Hurst coming up. Live from the Trustmark Studios of the Gallo Show, Mike Hurst, one final segment here. I love this. The FBI is going to be called in. Ha, 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 ha. You may be right. C-Spire text line. And also, if it was a justice that leaked it, would that be grounds for dismissal?
It's a great opinion, great question.
Yeah, it is a good question. All right, on this, maybe the development of a judicial court system in the capital area. What do you think about that? How do we solve this problem? Because do you really believe they're going to be able to solve it on their own?
I don't think it's a bad idea. The question I have about that is we're just carving out a part of Jackson to protect.
Mm-hmm.
And, while we may be able to do that, the rest of Jackson is going to go to hell in a handbasket. And that's what we're seeing. Tyree Jones, the new sheriff here in Hinds County, I thought he put out an incredible post on Facebook, his personal Facebook page, basically calling parents out for these kids doing this shooting. He said, you parents know exactly what your children are doing in the street. You know their life they're living, yet there's no accountability or intervention. And he ends his post, it was a great post, but he ends his post saying, where's the village? We damn sure need it.
Yeah.
And that's the frustration that folks in law enforcement are finding, because here's the problem. You've got 15, 16-year-olds shooting people. There are no parents. There's no father in the home many times, and it's left to law enforcement to try to parent. And sadly, as the sheriff mentioned in his post, either arrest or pick their dead, cold bodies up off the streets. And that's a sad thing for any kid.
If it's this easy for a 14 or 15-year-old to go get guns, and some of these may not be from the house itself. They may have picked them up on the streets.
And what I was about to say before the break was it's not just the mayor, although he is a huge factor contributing to the crime in Jackson. It's also our local judges. The 15-year-old they arrested, Paul, that you mentioned?
Yes.
What many people don't realize is about 19 months ago, when this kid was 14 or maybe even 13, he carjacked or attempted to carjack 4 different people at gunpoint. A 13 or 14-year-old carjacked or attempted to carjack.
Yeah.
What do you do with a
13? What do you do with a 13? What do you do with a 13-year-old?
We've got juvenile detention. If you've got a 13 or 14-year-old
there are people who tell me that that thing is run down or is not used that much. Run down?
It's not used because our judges refuse to keep these people in prison. That's the problem.
Mike, do folks understand? And I'm not sure if it's true in this case, but I do know that he was the DA was targeted as far as George Soros is concerned. But we see this all over the country where he has put people in as far as DAs, and I don't think people understand what kind of damage this guy's doing.
No. I think it's brilliant what George Soros has done in the sense of investing in district attorneys and investing in justice, local judges, because what is happening is they're going in there, they're inserting their own political philosophy in contravention of what the legislature has decided as our elected representatives, and saying we're just not going to enforce laws, we're not going to keep violent criminals in prison, and the result is you and I and everyone who works or lives in Jackson are now under threat of violence. That's the simple. It's not, but Jackson is not safe. I don't care what the mayor says. I love this city. This is our capital city. But at the end of the day, when you have 150 plus murderers and a murder rate 4 times the size of Chicago, that is not safety.
If tomorrow you installed African-American Republicans, you would see a major, major change in 10 years in this city, period. It is the political philosophy that these people are ruling by that's killing this, and it has been for a long time in the city of Jackson. The worst picture I saw was somebody took a picture and they tweeted this out. just walking into the crowd and seeing and being able to photograph somebody carrying a gun. Just a youngster carrying a gun in the crowd, had his hand on the gun in his pocket.
And I keep hearing our friends at the mayor's office, not friends, the mayor of Jackson, Lumumba. This guy has 4 armed security guards around him. He lives in a gated community. Yeah, I guess he can call Jackson safe when you live like that. But at the same time, when kids are walking around with guns on their hips, that's illegal. And the police can arrest them. They should arrest them. They should lock them up, and we should be protected.
The real culprit on this one has to be the electorate who vote for this guy and put people like that in, whether it's on the city council or in the mayor's office.
Until the people of Jackson decide to change their city, nothing's going to change.
You got it. It's been an interesting hour. I thank you so very, very much. It was well timed. Thank you.